0 to 60 is good. Truckers say fastest from 40 to 70, even better. Throw in 4 massive disc brakes. And you got
contents of those feeds as they come in for different topics. So one of the topics that might be, for example, learning objects. So every resource, every post by every person, 300 and so people, I check and see if it has anything to do with learning objects. And if it has something to do with learning objects, I send it to a very specific learning objects feed. And you can subscribe to different EduRSS feeds on my website even now. So, edu bloggers, media, cyberculture, things like that. So I have topic-specific RSS feeds. And I think that this is going to become more prevalent in the future because the way things are going, there's more and more people creating resources and creating feeds online, and it's difficult to find resources from authors you don't know about. And the way to solve that problem is, instead of subscribing to authors, you subscribe to topics. Other ways of creating ideas, I talked about concept mapping and mind mapping. There's a whole bunch of tools, Web 2.0 enabled tools. They're visual tools, and they let you draw pictures and things like that. Bubble.us, for example, or flowchart.com. One that I like a lot is called Gliffy, Gliffy.com. And again, it lets me create flowcharts, and you don't need to be a good artist. That's why I really like it. It has all of these predefined shapes, and you just drag the shape and drag arrows to the shapes and put little text in. And then, of course, because it's all JavaScript and Ajax and all of that, it saves your diagram right there on the website, so you're working interactively with it. Storyboarding and works the same sort of way. A very popular Web 2.0 application is web comics, where you can use these tools to create your own comic strip, either with actual pictures that you put speech bubbles on, or actual comics with cartoon characters. So there's mainada.net/comics, for example, or QuickTunes. These again are on the slides, so you'll be able to access these after. And so on. And I can continue on, and I could talk for the rest of the day just simply listing the names of Web 2.0 applications that help you create things. So we'll move on now to decision making. And it's here that we're going to see the first sort of real cleave between collaboration as we've always understood it and collaboration as it happens online. In the world of Web 2.0, I mean, typically, well, you wouldn't need to make decisions properly, so call people just did whatever they wanted to do. You wanted to create a blog post, you created a blog post. You wanted to comment on something, you commented on something. But one of the things that happened online is that sites like Slashdot became incredibly popular. The internet reaches everyone, or reaches everyone with an internet connection, which is about 1 billion people now, which means that on any given topic you can get 1 billion comments from 1 billion different people. And so you have a site like Slashdot, which is based on the contributions of people, and the question becomes, well, what do you put on the screen? Because you just can't put everything on the screen. They say there's no shortage of real estate on the web, but there is when you have a certain amount of bandwidth, a certain amount of time it takes to view something, a certain amount of scrolling that you have to do, even choosing what's going to be the top item on the screen. So Slashdot was one of the very first to begin experimenting with different decision-making processes, and they didn't, you would expect, well, one of the things a lot of sites did, the person who owned the site would make the call. Well, this will go on the top, this will be next. But Slashdot was much more community-oriented, and so they developed a rating system whereby the people who contributed comments could rate other comments, and the comments that were most rated would move up higher, and the comments that were less rated would move down lower. And so you got this slash dot model of this, and you got not just comments being rated, but you also got individuals who contribute comments being rated, so that one person's rating might count as more than somebody else's rating. So the decision-making process involved not just votes, but it involved individual reputations. And you combine this in with what is sometimes called collective wisdom. And the archetypical instance of this today on the web is a website called Dig. I'm not sure, you've probably heard of Dig, but what Dig is a website. People contribute stories, and then people either dig it or they don't dig it. Notice how I'm using the visual element here. And that's actually what the little icons look like on the website. And the articles with the most digs, they rise to the top of the website, and the articles with the fewest digs drop off the bottom of the website. There's actually quite a few sites that are set up like that. In Canada, here, there's a website called Progressive Bloggers that does the same sort of thing. It's kind of neat because Dig is, you have, I don't know, a gazillion people moving these things up and down, and then, so you have the story, and then you have hundreds of comments following the story. It becomes all very sort of cumbersome. But with a site like Progressive Bloggers, there's a lot fewer people moving these things up and down, which means, of course, they're easier to game, easier to manipulate. But on the other hand, when they're not being manipulated, they work a bit more smoothly. They're not so obtrusive on your browser. They don't take so long to load. They're a lot more snappy. But the idea here is that decisions are being made not so much by votes, and I think it would be a bit of a stretch to say that this is a vote, that a dig for a site is a vote one way or another, but rather by individual assessments of quality or individual decisions. It's kind of like the way decision making works on Google, because Google faces the same problem that Dig does. Google needs to return a list of results when somebody submits a search, and the question is, well, how do you do it? And the old way of doing it was the way Yahoo did it, and the way Yahoo did it is they had a whole bunch of indexers, and they indexed everything, and it took forever, and it wasn't really very reliable, and it was expensive. And the way Google does it, as I guess is by now common lore, is they look at how many other sites have linked to the resource in question. So you're doing a search, you search for Elvis, so you're matching the string Elvis, but now all kinds of sites have Elvis in them. Which site goes to the top? Well, it's the site that the most other sites link to. Well, except you can't just do that. You can't just count links, because you get people who create sites specifically for linking. They're called link farms. So you actually have to look at the credibility of the site. So a very credible site, like say mine, linking to a site that says Elvis, that'll push it up. But if it's just a site that somebody's created simply for the purpose of linking to the site, then that won't carry so much weight. So now you've got this more complicated formula here of links plus the Google rank or the page rank, the credibility, in other words, of the site doing the linking. And then there are going to be other considerations as well taken into account to determine how you weigh this. So again, it's not pure voting anymore, but rather it's a combination of all of these autonomous actions. Probably the most extreme case of this is a website like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, there's no voting at all, really. In the case of Wikipedia, each person simply contributes what they think the content should be, and the content ends up being whatever is there after that process. And what tends to happen is somebody puts in some content, somebody else corrects it and adds some more, somebody else corrects it, and people keep correcting it until the content settles into a version that nobody feels needs any more correcting. And it's almost like an annealing process where you can imagine the content swinging back and forth between sides until it settles on a wording that everyone would find acceptable. That's the theory in any case, but again, this is the sort of thing, it won't work so well with just a few people, because people, for one thing, they'd find no reason to settle, and for another thing, if you have, say, 12 people and 200 subjects, you just have way too many subjects per people, and you end up with just one person putting something maybe into a wiki page. Something like a wiki requires, as Wikipedia has, thousands, tens of thousands of people putting in content and corrections all the time. Otherwise, you don't get this settling out effect. If you only have 12 people, your content might end up here, or it might end up here. There's no back and forth happening. But again, you can sort of see, I think, that because these sites are a lot more interactive, and because they take into account multiple variables, the manner of decision making begins to change. The decision making in an online environment, I think, works very differently from decision making in a group environment where there are people around the table going yes and no, and having their votes and their discussions back and forth. At least that would be my view on this. The next step in the collaborative process is the actual work or the production, and for me that is crystallized with an application called Writely, which has now become Google Docs. And basically the idea here, because of the description of Web 2.0 that I've given you already, you can almost picture in your mind how this works. It used to be that one person worked on one document at a time. But now, because we can have a web page exchanging information with a server without reloading, you can have changes being made instantly. So I open up a document, let's say. Basically what that means is I open up a web form which has content, and we'll call the contents of that content a document, and then I start making changes. I type something into that document. Well, the way JavaScript works, JavaScript can pick up individual keystrokes. There's an actual JavaScript method. I think it's like on key press or whatever it is. I'd have to look it up. But basically, anytime I type something into that document, JavaScript goes, oh. And what I can set that script up to do is when I type something, I make a keystroke into that document, I can use Ajax and send that keystroke into the server. Well, great. Now the server's got the keystroke, which means if somebody else has the same document open in front of them, I can use my server to send that keystroke back up, which means you and I can be working on exactly the same document on our computer screens. You have it open on your screen, I have it open on my screen. You can be there in Toronto, I can be here in Moncton. I type my name in the document here, you see it appear there. What that means is the two of us can work on the same document at exactly the same time in the same place, even though we're wherever. All we have to be is online and in one of these Web 2.0 enabled environments. And of course, it doesn't need to just be a text document. That's the easiest and the first. But now we can use things like whiteboards and all of that. And I'm sure you've all seen even the higher level applications like Illuminate and Centra and that have these whiteboard applications where one person draws on the whiteboard and everybody else sees it. That is what's now available in web pages as well. There are Web 2.0 whiteboard applications where I draw and you can see we can both work at the same time. I'll talk briefly about Second Life in a little bit, but Second Life enables, again, the same sort of collaborative environmental manipulation where you and I can be in Second Life. We can be online in this 3D environment, and you can make a change on the object, and then I can make the change on the object, and we're working on exactly the same object in Second Life. Finally, the evaluation or the recap stage, which is essentially a reflection stage. This is actually, I think, the part of Web 2.0 which gets the most attention, because reflecting is the part where we're thinking out loud, if you will. Reflecting, therefore, is the part where we're typing up blog posts, or we're creating articles online, or even doing things like creating articles in Wikipedia, where we're doing things like collecting best practices. Any sort of content capturing and producing process can count as part of the evaluation and recap process. As well, any of these voting online, I'm trying to think of a Web 2.0 voting system off the top of my head. I wish I had an internet connection here, because I forgot to put it in the slides. And if I had internet here, I'd just do it on the side, and it would pop up, and then I'd see it. But I don't have internet here, so I can't remember it off the top of my head. So, and again, I've mentioned a few of these names, but if you actually would cover this slide presentation and follow some of the links on this, there are hundreds and hundreds of Web 2.0 applications that are inherently collaborative, communicative. They mash each other up. They do all kinds of things. I didn't even mention things like calendar applications, and there are Web 2.0 calendar applications. And again, they're the same sort of thing, right? You work collaboratively on a calendar. You enter in your calendar information, it pops up on someone else's calendar. But again, follow some of those links there. I actually mentioned it. The online education database list is actually quite a good list of Web 2.0 applications, and there are others as well. I want to talk, well, first I want to check and see how I'm doing on time here. 2:23, okay. Oh, that's good, that's not bad. Let me pause for a second, see if there are any comments or questions at this point.
Do you have comments, questions? Hi, this is Andrew McAllister from the Ontario College of Art and Design, and there's an anecdote and a question. I'm in both places, I don't know where to look. So the other morning I changed my Facebook profile to say that I was married, and somebody wrote on my wall and said, "You got married at 7:45 in the morning, congratulations." And I wanted to, perhaps you could make mention of, because you were talking about Dig and Facebook and some of these other tools, and I think that there are tremendous educational possibilities for them, that they're far more advanced than some of our siloed content management systems. However, I have grave concerns about things like privacy and the kinds of, the marriage example. I'm constantly having to be very conscious about how I moderate my online presence. Like, for instance, there's things that I wouldn't want any of my colleagues to know about me, or I keep to a smaller group of colleagues. Whereas, I'm in the OCAD community, so there are students and faculty, and I have to be, so there's an interesting kind of, I'm moderating my own avatar that's out there, that is my Facebook profile, but at the same time, what's the educational, how does one navigate through that sort of quagmire?
Yeah.
Don't feel the need to actually answer that.
No. It's a good point, and some of these trends we'll talk about it in the next section. But yeah, privacy and security, especially. I don't really talk about that specifically, though. Maybe I should have. I mean, there's two things that are going to happen, right? On the one hand, it's harder and harder to maintain our privacy. And so we have to be more attentive to that, which means We have to be attentive to what we put in Facebook and understand that what gets put in Facebook doesn't stay in Facebook. On the other hand, and this has been fairly widely documented, attitudes toward privacy are beginning to change. And people are behaving as though they expect that they're living their lives in public. And that shouldn't be as surprising as it sounds. For me, you have an anecdote, I have an anecdote. I grew up in a small town. In fact, I grew up in a small town in Ontario called Metcalfe, Ontario, which when I lived there had a population of about 500 people and as many cats and dogs. And privacy? There was no privacy. Everyone knew what everyone was doing there. And so, these 30 years later or whatever, here I am, I'm on the internet and I'm sort of like, privacy? What privacy? Everyone knows what I'm doing. And so I think that you can grow up and just sort of be in an environment where things that used to be private aren't necessarily going to be private. If you get married at 7:15 a.m., everybody in the world knows that you're married at 7:15 a.m. Or if you're just creating your Facebook account and you have just now put in that you're married, again, that's going to show up. And people just sort of, whatever, life goes on. So, you see these articles, and I'm sure you've seen them like in the Chronicle or wherever. So-and-so put something in their Facebook account and they're worried now that 20 years later they'll be fired from a job, or they actually have been fired from a job or whatever. And, again, there's the two sides to it. On the one hand, there's the side, don't do the stupid behavior. We had a person came in, give a talk here in Moncton not too long ago and said, well, if you hand in a resume that says you only had one employer, and then you say in your Facebook account that you had 4 employers and you didn't like any of them, you might get caught. My advice is don't hand in the false resume. So like what we say in public is going to have to actually be in the future more true. And so that's one of these things that people will have to begin to get used to. On the other hand, there's this whole architectures of control thing, and when a technology is developed that invades privacy, people develop ways of getting their privacy anyways. Again, in this conference that I was at just a couple weeks ago, they talked about the proliferation of security cameras. Of course, everybody, especially in Europe, they say, well, security cameras, what are you going to do? They always know where you are. And so they start doing things like, wearing hoodies and things like that. And I was thinking about that because, we don't have the security cameras in this country, but what we do have are these speeding cameras and these red light cameras. I'm sure you've seen them, or you probably have them there, right? Do you have them in Toronto, or the highway cameras? Had them in Edmonton when I lived in Edmonton. Basically, there's a freeway in Edmonton, and they just mount the camera above the freeway, and it's pointed down, and it clocks the car. And if the car is speeding, it takes a picture of the car and therefore the license plate, right? And then automatically sends a ticket to the owner of the car. And they also do these on red lights, right? They're red light cameras. They're mounted on top of the red light. And if you run a red light, it takes a picture of the car and automatically sends you a ticket. Do you have those there? Yeah. So
yes, we do.
I thought about that, and if you go out and you look, you'll see that more and more, there's a couple of things that are happening. One thing that's happening, people are putting covers, plastic covers over their license plates. And those are kind of neat because when you look at them straight on, you can see the license plate no problem, but they're opaque to the cameras. The other thing I saw, this is on the racing, or the sports cars, the coupes or whatever, and the back of the car comes down, and then there's a little ridge, and then it goes down. So it's sort of like a ridge like that, and that's where the license plate is. So again, there's this protective thing so that the red light camera or the speeding camera doesn't see the license plate. The police car here or another driver can see the license plate, but there's this little ridge. And if you look for that, you'll see people are doing these little innocuous things to protect their license plates from being seen by these cameras. You know, legal things are just, you know, at the edge of legality. And so I think that the lesson to be drawn from that is that, you know, there's a push and a flow, and there's going to be a back and forth. Our attitudes will adjust, but also, you know, like people are ornery. Well, comply. They don't just go with the flow. If their lives are being exposed on Facebook, they change their lives, or, you know, I mean, I would start, you know, if I was really worried about it, I'd start throwing false data out there. You know, my life's on Facebook and it's going to get me in trouble. Well, I'm going to put many lives on Facebook. I'll put so much stuff on Facebook. I'll talk about the shark attack and my career as a pirate and the time I was in the war. You know what I mean? So, and people play with their identities, and, you know, people have, and this is the importance of the work that Dana Boyd is doing. Identity isn't something that you're stuck with anymore. You know, and, you know, data about you isn't something that is done to you anymore. Not nearly as much as it was. You know, and people are much freer to create what it is that they are, rather than being given what it is that they are. I'm not expressing that as well as I would like, but, you know, it's like you described the force, the push against privacy, and push against privacy. The problem with it isn't so much the exposure, it's the loss of control. It's, you know, it's not so much, you know, who cares if your boss knows that you're a communist? The problem is if your boss fires you because you're a communist, right? It's the control thing. So if you can push back the control, if you take back the control, then the loss of privacy doesn't matter so much. And so I think we see that. I think we see people playing with control of information, playing with that flow of information. I think we'll see more of that in the future. We'll see, you know, deceptive profiles, not deceptive in the sense of being fraudulent, but deceptive in the sense of, you know, just kind of a smoke screen, kind of, you know, the information's out there. Well, let's just muddy the waters a bit. It seems to be the logical way to go.
Stephen,
yes.
I kind of jumped ahead and counted the number of slides you have, and you have 20 odd left. I'd like to know what you'd like to do from here. Would you like to keep just chatting and have in the last 10 minutes, or do you actually want to focus on a couple key slides before we move into another kind of discussion level, or what's your preference here?
Let me just outline the trends briefly, and then I'll spend about 2 minutes talking about the last 20 slides. There's the last set of slides there is on the philosophy, and I can cover the philosophy very quickly without having to go through all the slides. That's why it's better when I just have the slides and you don't know what they are. No, I'm just kidding. All right, but yeah, I do want to identify these trends because I think these trends are important. First trend everybody knows about, but I need to identify it anyways for completeness, and that's the trend towards user-generated content. And we are seeing, as a result of the much greater capacities that people now have to produce high-quality content, that they are in fact producing high-quality content, or even low-quality content. What's undeniable is that they're producing piles of it. And this content is in large part becoming a challenge to, and even in some cases replacing traditional professional or authority-driven content. The classic example, of course, is Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica. But I mean, we're seeing the news media world has been just completely rocked by the internet, because because of the impact of individuals blogging and what they're calling citizen media or citizen journalism. It's having a huge impact on professional journalism. Or people talking about YouTube replacing television. And it's kind of funny because I sit there in my living room, my computer's here, my television's here, and I've got, I don't know, American Idol here, and I don't know, something else here. British American Idol here, whatever, you know what I mean. And you know, my attention is today like drawn back and forth between the two, and I know the one on my computer is only this big, and the one on my TV is this big, but the one that's this big is more interesting. It's, you know, it's maybe you saw it recently. If you haven't, look it up. It's on YouTube, but just do a Google search for Battle in Kruger Park. You may have seen a spectacular video of a water buffalo, a baby water buffalo. I don't know what they're called, buffaloettes. Attacked by a pack of lions. The poor little baby water buffalo falls into the water, where thereupon it is attacked by a crocodile. Anyhow, watch the video. I've never seen anything on nature television remotely as riveting as that. And what's interesting too is it's so personal. It's a YouTube video. It's somebody who was there on a tour. And you know, so anybody, you know, I was on a tour at Kruger National Park about a year ago, and so it's not, you know, all of a sudden there's that connection that's there. It's like that person was there. There's the sound, the background. It's just like I saw and I heard and all of that, except they saw this water buffalo and I didn't. So there's a much more personal connection. It's not some nice polished National Geographic with Lauren Green in the background. It's like people go, oh, I hope that little buffalo survives, and so on. Related to that first point, that first trend is the trend toward multimedia in general. We had the text-driven web, even as recently as a few years ago with blogging and all of that, we had the text-driven web. We are now well into the multimedia web. You know, this year is certainly the year of video with YouTube and all of that. It's also the year of multimedia environments with Second Life and World of Warcraft and others. Even audio with podcasting and animations, and there's going to be much more of these. I don't know if you play these flash games. These flash games are horribly addictive, but again, it's multimedia. I've still got a sore wrist from shooting arrows on one of these and trying to do work, and I'm playing this little flash game instead. But again, multimedia, the web is becoming multimedia. Web 2.0 is becoming multimedia, which means we have user-created, user-driven multimedia, and it's beginning to have an effect even on things like the game industry. People expect now, when they get a computer game, to be able to modify their computer game, to rewrite sections of the computer game, to supply their own graphics. If you look at a game like Civilization, for example, Civilization, you have Civ, and then you go online, you find Mod Civ or Civilization mod packs or whatever, and people do this game modding. The company that most gets this, interestingly, is Lego. And Lego has the whole Lego construction kit and all of that, and kids are doing all kinds of, they reprogram their Lego engines, they make Lego robots and things like that. If Legos could fly, kids would be making Lego bombers and things. And, you know, and I'm just thinking, now I'm just thinking out loud, because, you know, we think about media, we think, okay, well, what kind of media are there? There's text, yeah, sure, okay, there's text, and then, well, what's else? Audio, yeah, okay, and there's audio, and there's video, and then there's, okay, well, maybe multimedia. And the thought just occurred to me as I was talking about Legos, that the next media is actually objects. And maybe Web 3, somebody was asking about that earlier. Maybe Web 3 is the web of objects. You know, there has been talk of the world of objects, and we have RFID tags, so every object in the world can have a little tag that's broadcasting wireless information about itself. Hi, I'm a craft dinner, or whatever. I'm a pair of jeans. I'm being stolen. Stuff like that. But what if people could create their own objects with their own digital properties in those objects? I'm gonna have to think about that. I think there's something to that, but I don't know what it is. And the next trend I wanted to point to is flow. This is a really important trend. This is a trend that's been underway for a long time, but we're really beginning to see it now. My first alert to this trend was in Douglas Rushkoff's book, Siberia, where he talked about the metaphor, the dominant metaphor of the internet being that of surfing. And the idea of surfing is that you don't capture and hold a wave, but rather you look at the wave, you ride the wave, you go with the wave, and then the wave goes. And so it's a shifting of the way of looking at online content as being static, as being like books, as being like libraries. And if you think about how so many people talk about online content, they use that kind of book or magazine or publication or object kind of vocabulary, static objects, static web kind of vocabulary. But really what's happening more and more is that the web is about flow rather than objects. Think about instant messages or SMS, and nobody saves their instant messages. At least nobody I know of saves their instant messages or their SMS. You thumb into your phone. I'm at the store, and your mother doesn't save that into the vault because it comes, it goes. There's a website now. You've probably heard of this website, Twitter, and what Twitter is a website where you have, I forget what it is, 144 characters or something like that, and you just enter in your 144 characters. Going to the store, or just saw Gladiator, or whatever. Just whatever you happen to be doing. The idea is that people, they enter it into Twitter, and then there's a group of other people, social network, remember, that follow you on Twitter, and people who are into Twitter swear by it, because now you've got this presence. You know what these people, what these strangers are doing. I know what people are doing in Colombia. It's a very odd sort of thing. You couldn't have imagined that before. Those of you who have Facebook accounts may be seeing your Facebook status updates being used in the same way. Certainly I'm using mine in that way. And I open up Facebook, and I've got, about 130 friends on Facebook, which is completely surprising to me, but I do. And I know what they're doing. I know what a certain percentage of them are doing, because they're telling me they're updating their status. So I know that some people were out biking last week, and other people were watching movies, and other people were working, and it's the oddest thing. But I'm not saving that. It's just, that was last week, and that's what they were doing last week, and now I'm not interested anymore. And we're seeing this with the content feeds like RSS and podcasting, and even to a degree things like YouTube, and I subscribe to a feed, the most viral videos, and it's like the top of the pop charts. Like content comes, content goes, and we're mostly not hanging on to it. And I think that changes the way we look at things like, say, learning content, or it should change how we look at learning content, because the way we have looked at learning content historically is that learning content is static. Learning content is a textbook. Learning content is a library. Learning content is a course package. But maybe learning content is more like the classes that we give. And I think about the times that I've been in a classroom, and that's pretty transient kind of stuff. I go into the class and give my talk and do my resources and the questions and the answers and the exchange and the exercises and all of that. And that's not permanent. That's not something that was created, stored, and then put on a shelf and then later retrieved. It's this dynamic, fluidic interchange. And I think that is beginning to characterize online information more and will more and more characterize educational resources. It's, I have on the slide here, how do you survive in a world of constant change? And I think that people who are more and more in tune to things like Web 2.0 have the answer, and the answer is to stop thinking of things as static. It's like we have a river here in Moncton. It's kind of a muddy river, but it's a river as a river goes, and every day that river is different. It completely replaces the water in itself. And how do you deal with that? You don't think of the river as something that you have to keep a hold of. You understand the river flows, and it's going to be different tomorrow than it was yesterday. Identity. Huge trends happening here, huge change happening here. We talked a bit about Facebook and a bit about people creating identities. The main idea here, I think, the main thing that is happening is that identity is being seen as personal and not institutional. And I'm not sure how to phrase that exactly. Again, I have on the slide, you own your own data, but it's not just that. To a large degree, you create your own idea, your own data. Your identity is what you create. Talking about Facebook, if Facebook is your identity, and let's suppose for the sake of argument that it is, or if your Facebook profile is your identity, well, everything you put on your Facebook profile, you put on your profile. And so on the one side of it is, okay, you need to be a little bit careful. You might not want to represent yourself as, a drunken partier who's out all night and snorts cocaine or whatever. On the other hand, you get to define your own identity. You are the one creating your Facebook profile, which is a really different sort of relationship to your identity data that you had in the past. In the past, your identity data was always held by and controlled by other people. The schools, the police department, the hospital, your parents, whatever. And to a large degree, that isn't going to change. Of course, all these people are still going to have bits and pieces of data related to you. But more and more, especially as privacy becomes a concern, you're going to have a larger and larger hand in creating that. Where we're seeing this actually specifically instantiated in code in the new web is in technologies like OpenID. OpenID is a protocol that allows you to have one single identity of your choosing that you can use across sites. So I can use the same identity on Facebook, MySpace, Yahoo, Google, whatever. That's where it's going to go in the future. It's not currently the case, although a lot of these companies, including Microsoft, have signed on to it. A lot of these companies have said, yes, OpenID is where we want to go. And not simply that, they've been, and Microsoft's included in this, they've been signing patent waivers saying that we will not enforce any patents related to OpenID. Very important, because it means that it has a fighting chance now. What's significant about OpenID is not simply that you have the same identity in these multiple places, but you manage your own identity. There is no single registrar of identity. Remember Microsoft Passport? And the idea of Microsoft Passport is everybody would have a Microsoft Passport and then you'd use that identity. But the problem with Microsoft Passport is that it was Microsoft Passport. Everybody had to go to Microsoft to get a passport. With OpenID, anybody, utterly anybody, can be an identity provider. You can be your own identity provider. Because in a sense, OpenID flips or turns the tables. Instead of you proving to some other person that you are who you say you are, rather, you are proving to your own satisfaction that you are unique on the other service. In other words, it's a system of self-identification rather than authentication. And that's the important difference. And so what that means is that in order to make the system work, there needs to be an incentive for people to maintain their own identity, which means it has to serve their own interest. It means that they have to have more and more control over it. So, it's going to be a couple of years before this becomes really widespread, but eventually probably everybody will have one or more open IDs. Probably it won't be as extreme as, in Estonia, of all places, the government issued every citizen an open ID. I don't think the whole world will be that extreme, but I do believe that people will have open IDs. They'll have their preferred identity that they use. Every user who belongs to America Online has an open ID. They might not know it yet, but they have one. And I think what will happen is people will have their preferred work ID, their preferred social ID, their preferred whatever ID. They'll have different IDs for different purposes. And our understanding of what an identity is will shift a little bit. This leads to the next major trend, which I title "No More Walled Gardens." And again, you look at Facebook, and in a certain sense, when you put data into Facebook, as they say, it's a one-way trip. The data goes into Facebook, it never comes out of Facebook. Well, it comes out, people can read it. But remember, I was talking about these applications talking to each other and REST and all of that. So one application can do a mashup with another application. Well, a lot of these social networking services don't support that yet. In other words, if I have a list of friends at Facebook, I can't simply use that list of friends on Flickr. Flickr has no way of getting that list from Facebook. But this is a temporary situation, especially if I have a single ID in Flickr and Facebook. If I have that one ID, then there's going to be a great deal of pressure on Facebook to open up, particularly since there's a website that's been releasing Facebook's source code. So I think it may be opened up whether they like it or not. That's quite...
Stephen?
Yes?
I think we're running a bit over as it is.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you could just maybe round off a key issue maybe or two, and then I can open the floor for discussion for a little bit, because we are already over. And I realize we did start a bit late, mind you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't mean to go over. My apologies for that. The only other trend I really wanted to talk about is the personal learning environment. And basically what that is if you take personal identity and multiple providers and all of this communication back and forth and apply it to learning, you get something called the personal learning environment. And I think that if you look at these Web 2.0 applications, look at the way a lot of this stuff is rolling out on the internet, that you can see underlying principles. I call this the semantic principle, and in one sense it's descriptive in the sense that this is what's happening, but in the other sense it's prescriptive in the sense of if we want this kind of system to work, these are the properties these applications are going to have. And the properties are very simply, first of all, they need to support individual autonomy. People need to have the capacity to make their own decisions, to manage their own data, to make their own creations, things like that. Secondly, they need to support diversity. Rather than forcing everybody into the same thing, they need to allow people to make their own choices. And what's important is they need to allow people who have made different choices to be able to interact. Third, openness. The network needs to be open. That means that people need to be able to contribute to the network, and it also means that people need to be able to access data and information from the network. And then finally, connectivity or interactiveness. There needs to be ways for people who are in the network to communicate back and forth with each other, and so that there aren't barriers or blocks from one person communicating with another person. You see more about these in the slides, so I go on about these quite a bit more in the slides, and I've talked about these 4 principles and others in my talk. So if you're interested, you'll be able to find more on my website. So
I have a personal question with regard to that last comment, and then I'll pass the mic around.
Sure.
But for me, those elements that you just spoke of beg the question, is there enough bandwidth to do this? And what is the role of an institution that traditionally has done a lot of these developmental pieces that now can be downloaded from the web? And then what is the role of the institution in acquiring bandwidth and controlling that even further? I think it does allow for a freedom, but at the same time we're constrained by what's available, what the institution will make available, and the priorities it will place in certain elements of availability. So that's just a general comment. I don't know if you want to respond. I will pass the mic.
Yeah, bandwidth is one of these. I think there's going to be enough bandwidth, and the questions will largely be who pays for it, because there's going to be a demand for bandwidth. It's not like bandwidth is always going to be expensive. I mean, fiber optics can move huge amounts of bandwidth. We work in NRC with CA-Net4, which is fiber at bandwidths that are not even imaginable. So I think the bandwidths will be there. The role of the institution is much more interesting, because as we shift from a more group-centered to a more network-centered environment, the things that institutions do, I'm trying to say this quickly and I can't. The sorts of things that institutions do will become less valued, and indeed will become more problematic. Like one of the things institutions do really well is standardize. But in a world where diversity rather than sameness is a value, the push to standardization becomes a hindrance rather than a support. And that's just an example. Institutions are going to be facing these kind of fights. Institutions are structured typically hierarchically, not as networks. They're structured with processes of management and control in an environment where more and more it's going to be important to allow people to work without manage and without being controlled. And again, so these things are going to clash. So
Thanks.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I can't say it quickly.
That was good for the amount of time that we gave you. Any other questions or comments here? What about a resounding thank you, Stephen?
No,
Thank you,
thanks,
Stephen.
thanks everyone. Sorry I went over time.
That's okay. Thanks for taking the time to do this. And we can refer back to your slides at any time, I take it?
Yeah,
Excellent.
downs.ca.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a good conference.
Thanks a lot, Steve. We have a bit of a break.